I'm Emily Chen. I'm 29 years old. I'm a marketing manager in Austin, Texas. And tonight at my engagement dinner, my future mother-in-law stood up during the toast and told everyone I was a con artist who had faked my entire career. She had printed screenshots. She had a timeline. She even had a witness. But then the restaurant server stopped mid-pour and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I know you. You're not her mother. You're the woman who tried to pull this same stunt at a wedding last year." And suddenly, the whole room went silent. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Emily Chen, and until that dinner, I thought I knew my fiancé's mother. We had met maybe 6 times. She was polite, distant, the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. But I had no idea who she really was, and neither did anyone else at that table. The server who spoke up had no reason to lie. She had worked that wedding last year, seen the same screenshots, heard the same accusations. Except the bride then had been someone else entirely. By the time the manager came over, I realized this was not about me. This was a pattern that had been hidden for years, and I was about to find out how deep it really went. To understand why she did it, you have to understand who she was before that night. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She was 62 years old, a retired elementary school principal from a small town outside Dallas. She had raised her son David alone after her husband died when David was 8. She had sacrificed everything, sold the family house, worked 2 jobs, never remarried, and by every measure, she had succeeded. David graduated top of his class, earned a full ride to UT Austin, and landed a 6-figure engineering job by the time he was 25. She was proud of him in a way that bordered on obsessive. She called him every single day. She kept a photo album of every girl he had ever dated, with notes in the margins. She had a spreadsheet. I met David 3 years ago at a coworking space in Austin. I was freelancing after leaving a toxic agency job. He was between meetings and spilled coffee on my laptop. He apologized so profusely I ended up laughing. We exchanged numbers for the insurance claim, and 6 months later we were living together. The first time I met Margaret, she drove 6 hours from her town to see us. She brought casseroles, homemade jam, a photo album of David as a child. She hugged me like she had known me forever, but there was something in her eyes that I could not name. A flicker of appraisal, like she was measuring me against a list I would never see. Over the next 2 years, the flicker became a pattern. Every holiday visit came with a question that felt like a test. Why was I still freelancing instead of getting a real job? Did I really think graphic design was a stable career? Had I considered that David might want children? And if so, how would that work with my schedule? She asked these questions with a smile in front of David so that any reaction from me would make me look difficult. And David never defended me. He just changed the subject. I told myself it was because he did not want conflict with his mother. Later, I would learn that he had been trained his entire life to avoid her displeasure. The engagement happened 6 months ago on a hiking trail near Austin. David had planned it for weeks. He had my ring custom made, a sapphire with 2 small diamonds because I had once mentioned I did not want a traditional diamond. It was perfect. I said yes immediately. And when we called Margaret to tell her, she was silent for 3 full seconds before saying, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I cannot wait to help plan the wedding." Her voice was warm. But the silence before it told me everything. In the months that followed, Margaret inserted herself into every decision. She wanted a venue near her town, not ours. She wanted a Saturday in June, even though we had already booked a caterer for October. She vetoed my dress choice twice by sending David articles about what colors flattered different skin tones. She suggested I lose a few pounds for the photos. I started dreading her calls. David told me I was overreacting. He said she just wanted to feel included. He said her life had been hard, and she needed to feel needed. So I swallowed my discomfort and let her plan a rehearsal dinner she had already designed in her head. The engagement dinner was her idea. She insisted on hosting it at a restaurant called the Gilded Lily in downtown Austin. A private room, 30 guests, a fixed menu. She said it was her gift to us. I did not argue because arguing with Margaret was like arguing with a tide. You could shout all you wanted, but the water would still rise. That night, I wore a blush pink blouse and soft jewelry. My engagement ring caught the light when I raised my hand. David held my hand under the table. Our families mingled, toasts were made, everything felt almost normal. Then Margaret stood up, tapped her glass with a fork, and smiled. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about how proud she was of David, how hard she had worked to raise him right. Then she turned to me. Her smile did not change, but her voice dropped half an octave. She said she had done some research because a mother's job was never done. She said she had found inconsistencies in my resume, gaps in my employment history, a social media profile that did not match the person I claimed to be. She said she had spoken to former colleagues who did not remember me. She said she had a folder of evidence. I felt the blood drain from my face. David's hand tightened on mine. Someone at the table laughed nervously. Margaret pulled a stack of printed pages from her purse. She held them up like a prosecutor showing Exhibit A. She said, "Emily, I know you are not who you say you are. You have been lying to my son since the day you met him." The room went dead quiet. I could not speak. I could not breathe. I was about to defend myself when a voice cut through from behind me. "Ma'am, I am sorry to interrupt." It was the server, a woman in her mid-40s with a name tag that said Rebecca. She had been pouring water at the table next to ours. She set down the pitcher and walked toward Margaret. She said, "I know you. You were at a wedding here last year. You did the exact same thing to the bride. You stood up, made accusations, showed papers. The bride's father had to ask you to leave. I remember because I was the one who called the manager." Margaret's face went pale. Her hand with the papers trembled slightly. She said, "I do not know what you are talking about." But her voice cracked. Rebecca did not back down. She said, "You do, and I have the incident report from that night in the back office. Would you like me to get it?" I looked at David. He was staring at his mother with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, confusion, like a child watching a magic trick he did not understand. Margaret sat down slowly. The papers slid from her fingers onto the tablecloth. Someone picked them up and started flipping through. They were not about me. They were copied from a different woman's LinkedIn profile, a woman I had never met, a woman Margaret had clearly researched, printed, and repurposed. The dinner ended 30 minutes later. Most guests left early. David said nothing on the drive home. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the city lights blur past. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "She did the same thing to my daughter. Call me. I can prove it." And then a name, Patricia, and a phone number with a Dallas area code. I saved the number but did not call that night. I was still trying to understand what I had just witnessed. But by the next morning, I had made a decision. I was going to find out how many other women Margaret Holloway had tried to destroy, and I was going to start with Patricia. I called Patricia the next morning at 8:14 a.m. She answered on the first ring like she had been waiting for this call for months. Her voice was calm but tight. She said her daughter's name was Jessica. Jessica had been engaged to a man named Ryan Holloway. That name made my stomach drop. Ryan was David's older cousin, Margaret's nephew. The pattern was not random. Margaret had targeted someone inside her own family. Patricia told me the whole story. 3 years ago, at Jessica and Ryan's engagement party, Margaret had stood up and made accusations. She claimed Jessica had falsified her nursing license, that she had a history of stealing from previous employers, that she was only after Ryan's inheritance. She had printed documents, just like with me. The difference was, at that wedding, Rebecca had not been working. There was no server to stop her. The accusations spread through the family like wildfire. Ryan's father, Margaret's brother, demanded proof. Margaret produced a website that looked official but was registered to a fake email address 2 days before the party. She had created the entire thing. Jessica tried to defend herself, but the damage was done. Ryan started doubting. The wedding was postponed, then canceled. Jessica spiraled into depression. She lost her job at the hospital when rumors reached her supervisors. She moved back in with Patricia. For 2 years, she barely left the house. Patricia said the only reason she knew about my engagement was because her sister lived in Austin and had seen Margaret's social media posts about my engagement dinner. Patricia had been waiting, hoping someone would stop it before it happened again. She said, "Margaret has been doing this for decades, Emily. She did it to Ryan's first girlfriend. She did it to a woman David dated in college. The only reason nobody stopped her was because she always went after people with less power, women without families nearby, women who could not fight back." I asked Patricia if she had ever reported it to the police. She laughed. She said Margaret was a retired school principal with no criminal record. The police told her it was a family dispute. They said she should take it to civil court. But Jessica did not have the energy to sue. She just wanted to disappear. I hung up and sat on my bathroom floor for 20 minutes. The tile was cold. The ceiling fan made a clicking sound. I had never felt so small and so angry at the same time. I started a note on my phone. I wrote down Patricia's story. Then I texted David and asked if he knew about Ryan's ex-fiancée. He replied, "I heard rumors. My mom said she was unstable." I asked him if he had ever seen his mother do anything like this before. He said, "She's protective. She loves me." I thought you were exaggerating. That was the moment I realized David was not an ally. He was a hostage. Over the next 2 weeks, I found more. I tracked down 3 other women through Facebook groups and old wedding forums. A woman named Chloe from Plano. Margaret had befriended her, then accused her of being a gold digger at a family barbecue. Chloe broke up with David within a month. A woman named Vanessa from Houston. Vanessa had been engaged to David's friend Mark. Margaret sabotaged that relationship too, telling Mark's mother that Vanessa had a secret child. She did not. Mark broke it off. The third woman was the most painful. Her name was Linda. She had been married to Ryan's brother for 6 years before Margaret convinced him that Linda was cheating. The marriage ended. Linda lost custody of her daughter for 2 years during the investigation. The accusations were false, but the family court system moved slowly, and Margaret's testimony carried weight because she was a retired educator. I compiled everything into a document. Names, dates, screenshots, voice recordings Patricia had secretly saved. 15 years of Margaret Holloway's destruction. 5 relationships sabotaged. 2 marriages destroyed. 1 suicide attempt, Linda's, and now me. I called David and told him I needed him to read the document. He came over that night. I watched him scroll through my phone. His face went through a range I had never seen. Denial, confusion, then a kind of gray acceptance. He set the phone down and said, "I think I knew." He told me about his childhood. His mother had controlled everything, who he could be friends with, which sports he could play, what he wore to school. She had driven away his father emotionally long before the heart attack. She had isolated him from cousins, aunts, anyone who might tell him the truth. He said, "She made me believe that everyone who loved me would eventually hurt me except her. That was how she kept me close." I asked him if he was willing to stand up to her. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I do not know if I can." That night, I made a choice. I was not going to let Margaret Holloway take my life the way she had taken Jessica's, Vanessa's, Linda's, Chloe's. But I also knew I could not rely on David to protect me. The person I had trusted to be my partner had been conditioned for 30 years to protect his mother instead. The statistics say that in over 41% of in-law conflicts, the man sides with his mother. I was living inside that number. I started researching legal options. I spoke to a family lawyer who specialized in parental interference. She told me that in Texas, a parent can be held liable for emotional distress if they intentionally interfere with a marriage. But the burden of proof is high. She said my best option was to document everything and prepare for a restraining order if Margaret escalated. I asked her what counted as escalation. She said, "Showing up at your workplace, contacting your clients, publishing false information online, anything that crosses from family drama into harassment." I told her about the engagement dinner. She paused and said, "That might already be harassment. The fact that she used printed materials in a public setting creates a paper trail. Keep everything." 5 days later, Margaret escalated. She called David and asked to meet. He told her he needed space. She showed up at his apartment anyway with a box of his childhood things and a letter. He sent me a photo of the letter. It was 3 pages, handwritten, full of guilt and blame and love. She said she was only trying to protect him. She said I was not good enough, that I would leave him, that I was using him for his salary and his future. She said if he married me, she would cut him off completely, no inheritance, no contact, no future grandchildren in her life. David called me crying. He said, "She is forcing me to choose." I said, "She already forced you to choose, David. She has been forcing you to choose your whole life. You just never realized it." The next morning, I found a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Margaret. Her voice was eerily calm. She said, Emily, I know you have been talking to Patricia. I know you think you have evidence, but you do not know the whole story. I have been fighting for my family for 20 years. You have been in it for 3. You do not get to decide what is true. If you file anything, I will fight back. And I have more resources than you think." Then she hung up. I played it twice. My hands were shaking. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. A cold, clear certainty. She had just threatened me. That threat was evidence, and I was going to use it. I called the lawyer back and asked how to file for a protective order. She walked me through the process. I would need to submit the voicemail, the engagement dinner incident report from the restaurant, Patricia's testimony, and the document I had compiled. I spent the next 3 days organizing everything. I asked Rebecca, the server, if she would write a statement. She agreed. I asked Patricia if she would testify if needed. She said yes for Jessica. I asked Linda if she would share her story. She hesitated, then sent me a long email. She said she had been waiting for someone to ask. On the 4th day, I filed the petition at the Travis County Courthouse. The clerk stamped it without looking at me. She said I would be notified of a hearing date within 2 weeks. I walked outside and stood on the courthouse steps. The sky was clear. The air smelled like hot asphalt and jasmine. I felt lighter than I had in months, but I also knew that filing the petition was not the end. It was the beginning of a fight that would either save my relationship or destroy it. That evening, David came to my apartment. He looked exhausted. He sat on my couch and stared at the floor. He said, "My mother called me after you filed. She said you are trying to ruin her life. She said you are the aggressor." I told him what the lawyer had said about parental interference patterns, how abusers often reframe themselves as victims. David did not argue, but he did not agree either. He just sat there. And for the first time since we met, I saw him not as my fiancé, but as a person who had been broken in ways I could not fix. The next day, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of a restraining order, not against Margaret, against me. She had filed first. Margaret had filed first. The restraining order said I had harassed her, stalked her social media, contacted her employer, and made threats. She claimed I had shown up at her home uninvited. She claimed I had sent her threatening messages from a spoofed number. She claimed I was unstable and that she feared for her safety. Every accusation she had made against me at the engagement dinner was now part of a legal document. She had beat me to the courthouse by less than 24 hours. I called my lawyer immediately. She told me to bring the restraining order to her office. I drove there with the paper shaking in my hand. She read it twice, then set it down and said, "This is textbook reactive abuse framing. She's projecting her own behavior onto you. We will fight it, but you need to understand what this means. The court will take her filing seriously because she filed first. She is a retired educator with no criminal history. You are younger, unmarried, with a freelance career. The system favors her on paper." I asked her what my chances were. She said, "Your evidence is strong, but evidence does not always win against narrative. And her narrative is that you are a gold digger who tried to destroy her family when she exposed you." The hearing was scheduled for 11 days later. Those 11 days were the longest of my life. Margaret sent a group text to David's entire family. She wrote that I had filed a false report against her, that I was mentally unstable, that she had been forced to seek legal protection. She attached the restraining order but cropped out the part where I had filed first. The family split. David's aunt and uncle, Ryan's parents, sided with me because they knew about Jessica. But the rest of the family believed Margaret. One cousin sent me a Facebook message calling me a homewrecker. Another commented on a photo of me and David saying, "He deserves better." David was silent. He stopped responding to my texts. He stopped coming over. I called him 4 times in one night. He let all 4 go to voicemail. On the 5th call, he picked up. His voice was flat. He said, "Emily, I need time. I cannot think straight. My mother is telling everyone you are dangerous. My coworkers are asking questions. I do not know what is real anymore." I told him to look at the document I had compiled. I told him to call Patricia. I told him to read Linda's email. He said, "I will," but I could hear in his voice that he was already pulling away. The statistics about in-law conflict say that when a mother and partner go to war, the son chooses the mother more than half the time. I was watching that statistic become my life. 2 days before the hearing, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. It was a reporter from a local news station. She said she had received an anonymous tip that a woman in Austin was facing a restraining order from her fiancé's mother. She asked if I wanted to comment. I told her I could not talk and hung up. Then I called my lawyer. She was quiet for a moment and said, "This is escalation. She's trying to pressure you into dropping your case by dragging your name through the media. Do not engage, let me handle it." But the damage was already done. The next morning, I found a thread on a local Facebook group. Someone had posted my name, my photo, my freelance business page. They wrote that I was being investigated for harassment. The comments were brutal. People called me a predator. Someone said I should be deported. I was born in Dallas. I went to the courthouse alone. David had texted me that morning saying he could not be there, that it would make things worse. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and watched Margaret arrive with her lawyer. She wore a cream-colored blazer and looked like she was attending a church luncheon. She smiled at me, not a fake smile, a genuine one. She was enjoying this. Her lawyer approached me and handed me a settlement offer. If I dropped my petition, she would drop hers and we would agree to stay away from each other. No admission of guilt, no public record, just silence. My lawyer said the offer was designed to protect Margaret's reputation. She said, "If you take it, she wins. If you refuse, you risk losing the hearing and having a restraining order on your record. That can affect your career, your housing, your future." I asked her what she would do. She said, "I would fight. But I am not the one who has to live with the consequences." I fought. We walked into the courtroom at 2:00 p.m. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and a voice that did not waste words. Margaret testified first. She talked about how she had welcomed me into her family, how she had tried to help with the wedding, how I had turned hostile when she questioned my background. She said I had called her repeatedly, that I had shown up at her home, that I had sent her threatening messages. She produced phone records that showed calls from a spoofed number, but she could not prove the calls were from me. My lawyer pointed out that spoofed numbers can be generated by anyone, and that Margaret had not reported any threats to the police until after I filed my petition. The judge took notes but did not react. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand and swore to tell the truth. My lawyer asked me to describe the engagement dinner. I did. Every detail, the screenshots, the accusations, Rebecca stepping in. Then my lawyer introduced the incident report from the Gilded Lily. She introduced Patricia's written statement. She introduced Linda's email. She played the voicemail Margaret had left me. The one where she said, "If you file anything, I will fight back, and I have more resources than you think." The courtroom was silent. The judge listened without moving. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that the voicemail was taken out of context, that Margaret had been emotional, that a mother's concern did not constitute a threat. But I could see something shift in the judge's face. She asked Margaret directly, "Did you leave this message?" Margaret said yes, but claimed she was just worried about her son. The judge asked, "Did you file for a restraining order against Ms. Chen before or after she filed against you?" Margaret hesitated. Her lawyer intervened, but the judge repeated the question. Margaret admitted she had filed first. The judge wrote something down. Then things got worse for Margaret. My lawyer submitted a supplemental document. It was a list of every woman Margaret had targeted over the past 15 years. 5 names, 5 stories, 5 lives disrupted. My lawyer asked Margaret if she knew a woman named Jessica Holloway. Margaret said no. Then my lawyer produced a photo from Jessica and Ryan's engagement party. Margaret was in the background of the photo, standing near the cake, smiling. My lawyer asked, "Are you certain you do not know her?" Margaret did not answer. The judge called a recess. We waited in the hallway for 45 minutes. Margaret sat on the opposite bench, no longer smiling. Her lawyer was on the phone, packing. When we returned, the judge delivered her ruling. She said Margaret's restraining order against me was denied due to insufficient evidence of ongoing harassment. She said my petition against Margaret was granted in part. A protective order requiring Margaret to stay at least 200 yards from me, my home, and my workplace for 12 months. But the judge also said she could not compel Margaret to stay away from David. That was a family matter, not a legal one. I walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that said I had won. But winning did not feel the way I thought it would. My relationship was shattered. My reputation had been dragged through a Facebook thread. My freelance clients had started asking questions, and Margaret was still free to contact David, still free to poison him against me, still free to continue her campaign as long as she stayed 200 yards away. That night, David called me. He said he had read the document I compiled. He said he had spoken to Patricia. He said he had cried for 2 hours. He said, "I believed her. My whole life I believed her. And now I do not know who I am without that belief." I told him I loved him. I told him I wanted to rebuild. But I also told him that I could not be the only one fighting for us. He said he needed time to process. I said I would wait. But waiting felt like standing on a platform, while the train I was supposed to board kept moving. A week later, Linda sent me an email. She had read about the hearing online. She wrote that I had done what she could not do for herself. She said Margaret had called her the night after the ruling from a blocked number and left a voicemail. Linda said the voicemail was short. Margaret said, "You think you won, but I have been playing this game longer than you have been alive. I will wait. I will be patient. And when you least expect it, I will finish what I started." Linda reported it to the police. They said it was not actionable because Margaret did not specify a threat. But Linda told me she was sleeping with a knife under her pillow. I sat in my apartment that night and looked at the protective order framed on my desk. I had stopped Margaret in court, but I had not stopped her. The voicemail to Linda proved that she was still operating. She had simply adapted. She would wait. She would watch. She would use new numbers, new tactics, new women. And I realized that the court case had never been about justice. It had been about making her visible. And now that she was visible, she was more dangerous than ever because she had nothing left to lose. The protective order was a piece of paper. It meant I could not be near Margaret and she could not be near me. But it did not stop her from using the phone, from using family members, from using the internet. In the weeks after the hearing, I lost 3 clients. 2 had seen the Facebook thread. The third had received an anonymous email about my character. I knew where the email came from but could not prove it. My lawyer said that was the nature of proxy harassment. She uses other people to do the work, and you end up chasing shadows. David went silent again. I gave him space because I had no choice. But I also started preparing myself for the possibility that he would never come back, that the pull of his mother was stronger than the pull of our future. I read every study I could find. The Cambridge research showing that 60% of women report long-term unhappiness with their mothers-in-law. The data showing that men choose their mothers over their partners in 41% of serious conflicts. I was not special. I was a statistic, and statistics do not care how much you love someone. Then on a Tuesday night, David showed up at my door. He looked thinner. His eyes were red. He said he had been staying at a hotel for 3 days because he could not stand being in his apartment. His mother had been calling him 12 times a day. She had left long voicemails crying, screaming, threatening to harm herself. She had emailed his boss. She had contacted his landlord. She was trying to collapse every part of his life so that he would have nowhere to go but back to her. He handed me his phone. He said, "Listen." I pressed play on the most recent voicemail. Margaret's voice was raw, almost unrecognizable. She said, "David, I will kill myself if you marry that woman. I have nothing left. You are all I have. She has turned everyone against me. If you choose her, you are choosing my death. I swear to God I will do it." He took the phone back and said, "I called the police. They did a welfare check. She told them I was abusive and that she was afraid of me." They believed her. She is a retired principal. I am a son who has been lying to himself. I asked him what he wanted to do. He said, "I want to cut her off entirely. No contact, no explanation. I want to change my number, move, start over. But I am terrified that if I do, she will actually hurt herself, and it will be my fault." I told him something that my therapist had said to me years ago. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. If she chooses to hurt herself because you set a boundary, that is her choice, not your fault. His face crumpled. He cried for a long time. I held him and did not say anything else. The next morning, he changed his number. He blocked every email address, every social media account, every possible connection. He wrote a letter to his mother and mailed it certified. It said, "I love you, but I cannot live in your fear anymore. I am getting married. I am building a life. If you want to be part of it, you will need to get help and respect my boundaries. Until then, I cannot speak to you. I am sorry." He never heard back directly. But his aunt told him that Margaret had shown up at the family home in Dallas, screaming that David had abandoned her. The aunt told her to leave. She refused. The police were called again. That time, they told her she needed to leave and not return for 24 hours. Linda called me with news. She had found a therapist who specialized in family enmeshment and control dynamics. She had started going. She said the therapist told her that Margaret's behavior fit a clinical pattern often seen in parents with borderline or narcissistic traits. The enmeshment, the fear of abandonment, the splitting, the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened the bond with her child. Linda said it helped to have a name for it. She said, "I spent 6 years believing I was the problem. I am not. I was just in her way." I started therapy too. The therapist asked me to describe my childhood. I told her about my parents, who were immigrants who worked long hours and loved me but were emotionally distant. I told her that I had learned to earn love by being useful, by not causing trouble. She said that pattern made me vulnerable to someone like Margaret, who saw my willingness to accommodate as weakness. She said, "You were not weak. You were trained to survive by appeasing, but you can unlearn that." I started practicing saying no in small ways. No to extra work. No to social obligations I did not want. No to the voice in my head that said I needed to be perfect to be loved. David and I set a new date, October 12th. A small ceremony at a friend's ranch outside Austin, 30 people. No family on his side except his aunt and uncle who had stood by us. No mention of Margaret. I wore a simple white dress. David cried when I walked down the aisle. The officiant asked if anyone objected. No one spoke, and for one perfect moment I felt free. The wedding night, we stayed in a cabin near the ranch. There was no cell service, no way for anyone to reach us. I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of an owl and the smell of cedar. David was asleep beside me. His face was relaxed in a way I had rarely seen. I lay there and thought about Patricia, about Jessica, about Vanessa, about Chloe, about Linda. I thought about all the women who had been in my position but had not won. And I realized that winning did not mean Margaret had been stopped. It meant I had stopped letting her define my life. But there was one more piece. A month after the wedding, I received an email from a woman named Rachel. She lived in San Antonio. She said she had been engaged to David's cousin Ryan before Jessica. She said Margaret had sabotaged that relationship too 15 years ago. Rachel had been 18. Margaret had told Ryan's parents that Rachel was pregnant. She was not. The engagement ended. Rachel said she had never told anyone the full story because she was ashamed. She said, "I saw your story online. I wanted you to know that you are not alone, and that it started long before any of us." That email closed the loop I did not know was still open. Margaret had been doing this for at least 15 years, possibly longer. She had targeted at least 6 women that I knew of. 6 lives, 6 futures, and she had only been stopped because a server at a restaurant recognized her face. Not because the system worked, not because her family intervened, but because one stranger had the courage to speak up in a moment that mattered. I responded to Rachel. I told her she was believed. I told her that she had not imagined it. I told her that Margaret's power came from silence, and that every woman who spoke broke that silence a little more. Then I closed my laptop and went outside. David was in the backyard with our dog. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and pink. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I still do not know if Margaret will ever stop. People like her rarely do. They adapt. They find new targets. They wait for gaps in the protection. But I know that I am not her target anymore. And if she ever tries to come back, she will find a woman who knows exactly what she is. A woman who kept the voicemails. A woman who saved the screenshots. A woman who is not afraid to speak. Some stories do not end with the villain defeated. They end with the survivor finally believing she was never the problem. That was the ending I earned, and no one could take it from me. But that ending is not the whole story, because while I walked away with my life intact, Margaret did not disappear. She did not transform. She did not suddenly understand what she had done. 2 months after our wedding, her lawyer filed a motion to lift the protective order. The motion was denied. But the fact that she tried tells you everything about how people like her operate. They do not stop because they are caught. They stop because they are forced to stop, and they spend every moment after looking for a way back in. The research backs this up. Studies on parental interference patterns show that when a controlling parent loses direct access, they often escalate through proxies, family members, friends, even social media campaigns. The Cambridge study I mentioned earlier found that women who set boundaries with overbearing in-laws reported an average of 3 additional conflict episodes before the relationship finally stabilized or ended. The pattern does not break easily. It breaks when the person at the center, the child, decides that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of freedom. David made that decision, but he had to hit rock bottom first. He had to lose his apartment, almost lose his job, watch his mother weaponize his own guilt against him. And even then, the choice was not clean. He still carries a phone with her old voicemails saved in a hidden folder. He still flinches when the mail comes. Healing from enmeshment is not a single decision. It is hundreds of small decisions made over years. The decision not to answer a blocked call. The decision not to explain yourself. The decision to believe your own reality, even when the person who raised you insists you are wrong. I think about Linda sometimes. She moved to Oregon 6 months ago. She sent me a photo of her new apartment. There is a window seat and a garden. She wrote that she finally sleeps through the night. She said the therapist told her that the opposite of trauma is not safety, but agency. The ability to choose what happens next. I think about Jessica, who started a small baking business out of her mother's kitchen. She sent me a box of cookies for our anniversary with a note that said, "Thank you for being the one who spoke up, so I did not have to keep being quiet." And I think about the women I will never meet, the ones who did not have a server named Rebecca, the ones whose families chose silence, the ones who are still standing in a room full of people, watching someone they trusted rewrite their history in real time. There are more of them than any of us want to admit. The studies say that nearly 2/3 of married women report significant in-law conflict, but that number only captures the ones who are still married. The ones who walk away do not always leave a record. I kept the folder, the voicemails, the screenshots, the court filings, the emails from Patricia and Linda and Rachel and Jessica. I keep it in a fireproof safe in my closet, not because I think Margaret will try again, but because I need proof that I did not imagine what happened. That is the quiet horror of this kind of experience. The gaslighting continues long after the perpetrator is gone. You start to wonder if you overreacted. You start to wonder if you were the difficult one. You start to wonder if maybe she was right all along. She was not. That is the truth I had to fight for. And if you are watching this and wondering the same thing about your own story, I want you to hear it clearly. The person who made you feel small did so because they were afraid. Not because you were too much. Not because you were not enough. Because love that requires you to shrink was never love. It was control dressed in family language. I do not know if Margaret will ever understand that. I do not know if she will ever sit in a room with a therapist and tell the truth. But I do know that her power ended the moment I stopped carrying her voice inside my head. That took time. It took therapy. It took a partner who finally chose me. It took a stranger who stopped pouring water. And it took every woman who sent me a message saying, "Me too." If this story felt familiar, if something in it made your chest tighten, do not ignore that feeling. Talk to someone. Keep a record. Believe yourself before anyone else tells you what you should feel, because the system will not save you. The family may not believe you, but you can still build a life so full of your own truth that there is no room left for theirs. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have a story of your own, share it in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you want to see more stories like this, subscribe. Because silence is how these patterns survive, and we are done being silent.